Who is behind the decisions that affect the future of entire generations? How can we engage in dialogues with them? Do we need to listen to them for them to listen to us? Being young and trying to understand the corporate world can be tricky. But remember, the youth of today will become the CEOs of tomorrow. We aim to initiate conversations with decision makers amidst the ecological and climate crisis to build bridges towards future challenges. Join us on this journey as we unravel the complexities of the climate puzzle in order to find the missing pieces and build the sustainable future for generations to come. Welcome to the climate puzzle.
The first question that is like a pop-up in my head, because this happens to a lot of us as youth, that we are engaging every day in the climate and ecological crisis. How was this transition when you were in the public more sector, international organisms, and then you decided to go to this private large company, with the huge impact that has in the world, both positive and negative. How was that transition for you?
Well, having been with the public sector, and there was a lot of talk about private sector engagement. During my time at UNEP as well, because it was more geared towards sustainable consumption and production in particular, there's a lot of interaction with the private sector type of topics, right? And it was very obvious that private sector engagement or private sector activity is going to be at the core of really making the green economy transition actually happen. So I was very aware of that during my public sector professional days. And at the back of my mind, I've always wanted to really understand how public sector worked, what makes them tick. Obviously profits, right? But there are so many other elements that can help the private sector have a bit more ownership and drive and leadership in this whole sustainability space. Because in the past, sustainability was something good to have, nice to have, right? And it was much more in the realms of PR, public relations. But I'm really seeing the changes maybe 3 or 4 years ago, especially in this Asia region, maybe sooner in the European region, where sustainability has become a core part of the business strategy. So yeah, really trying to see how sustainability is not something nice to have, but a must have, and going forward, something that really has to be part of the business strategy, as opposed to, some PR, some CSR type of activity. So I was really interested in what could make that happen. And, you have to be an insider to fully understand, right? So I felt making the leap from public to private was for that purpose, to better understand the private sector workings, the ecosystem of the private sector. And the reason I joined a big ICT company, for that matter, was impact, right? You do a little thing, and the impact at the end of the day could be large. And that's what really attracted me to really join a very large company. Obviously, there are challenges because it's large, very complex, so many internal stakeholders to align the thinking and to come to a consensus with. But at the same time, even if there's a little bit of step forward, there will be a big impact at the end of that step. So that, I think, was what really drove me to make that leap, to join a very big company.
Before, or a couple years ago, when sustainability was a boom and it was more a PR thing, we can say that there was much more greenwashing at a corporate level.
Now, greenwashing has become a little bit more prevalent, maybe I would say about 4 or 5 years ago, where a company really, took interest in the sustainability issues, and they did some interesting works. It started to get integrated into business models, but it wasn't fundamentally changing anything. It was doing a little bit here and there, but it was sort of advertised as if it's the core of everything, even though it was a kind of a part of everything. It was advertised as if it was everything. So I think that's where the greenwashing concerns came. And now, as you know, the EU Green Claims Directive. There's a lot of now anti-greenwashing legislation that is being put up in countries. So now this has become a major issue, I guess, in many countries.
So what would you recommend about the private sector? Because we have demands, and our demands are honest and are totally fair. What we are demanding, we are seeing a world that is unjust, that is not fulfilling of expectations of what can be or it should be, and we are here trying. So what would you say to us? Well, in a very honest way.
Youth can really demonstrate power and a sense of direction through the choice of purchasing. So what you buy, what you demand the product should contain will send signals to companies and other stakeholders alike to change. Even governments, government needs to change the policy. In some countries, it's still very difficult to transition to green economy because of some policies that are not in place, right? And youth can demand that. Youth can opt for buying more sustainable products. So that would send signals for companies to make sustainable products, because youth will be current and future consumers of the products. So that's going to be a very powerful, I think, leverage that youth has. I think that's really the main power that youth can really exert. And also, just in your everyday life, there's so many sustainable activities that one can do. So even though it's small, if many people do it, if the youth does it, then it's going to send, again, very important message to the society.
We usually talk about the electronic waste management. We usually talk about circular economy. How far we are from the ideal waste treatment? Do you think there is a solution for it? Can we recycle every electronic waste electronic waste? Tell us a little bit about that world, as if I'm or the ones that are listening don't know anything about it.
No, it's a very interesting arena at the moment. I mean, electronic waste is nothing new. We've had electronic products from a past, and then there are countries who are making it legal requirement to what they call take back. So producers need to collect a certain amount of electronic waste according to the amount of products that they sell. And these countries would be obviously Europe, US, Korea is one of them. But not all countries have these legal requirements. So there are countries that actually require the take-back system, as they say. So there are, countries are collecting electronic waste to some extent. But the real challenge is what do you do after that? It's the more downstream ecosystem that's it's lacking. It's very weak. Because once you collect, you have to then valorize good materials that can be recycled, like metal, like copper, like lithium, like cobalt from batteries, like plastic. There are many materials that are in the electronic products. And we're not just talking about mobile phones here. We're talking about general electronic products, fridges, washers. All these things are electronic products because you plug the product into the electricity and then it functions, right? So there are many products that can fall under the e-waste category. But as I said, the problem is, yes, collection fine. Of course, we need to do more of the collection as well. But then what about the downstream? If you look at the downstream ecosystem, it's very fragmented. In some countries, it's like an underground economy, right? It's an informal sector in many developing countries. So that part has to be organized better. And not one private sector or company can do this. That probably is in the realms of policy. Let me just give you an example of batteries. Battery contain a lot of precious metals. It contains cobalt. Now, if I just kind of zoom in on the cobalt issue, a lot of the cobalt comes from DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, where child labor issue is quite quite serious. So, if we use more recycled cobalt from batteries, for example, waste batteries, we are diverting getting new virgin cobalt from mining, where potential child labor issue can happen. So yeah, there's that aspect. So, and battery also contain gold as well, in the PCB, boards. So there are many precious metals, minerals, and lots of great materials in there. But how do you actually make use of that is another issue. Now there are e-waste battery recycling companies, and more are coming up because of EVs, actually, not necessarily of electronic products, but EVs, because the EV has a big battery, right? So recycling that is something that needs to be done. But again,
yeah, electronic vehicles.
Exactly,
For
electric vehicles.
What
Yes.
is EV?
That's electric vehicles. So for EVs, electric vehicles, that's really a booming booming sector, and you need a very good battery. It's all about batteries, right, for electric vehicles. So there are now a lot of companies jumping into the electric vehicle battery recycling arena. But what we call LCOs, that's lithium cobalt battery, that goes into the electronic products. It's a bit different from what goes into the electric vehicles. So there are many challenges, but one main challenge is the Basel Convention. I don't know if people are aware of what Basel Convention is.
No.
It's a convention. It's an international legal convention where they prohibit the transboundary movement of hazardous waste. Because in the past, developed countries would sort of dump hazardous waste into developing countries. So this Basel Convention, it's a bit like the Climate Convention or the Biodiversity Convention, where the countries get together and form a sort of an international law where you try and prohibit or encourage certain things. So it limits the transboundary movement of hazardous waste, and electronic waste battery actually is part of the hazardous waste. It's regarded as hazardous waste because it contains some hazardous materials. However, if waste batteries are sort of limited by transboundary movement, then you can't recycle it properly, right? So this is where there's a conflict between global environmental sort of legislation and what you want to do well in the circularity aspects. So how do you reconcile the two is probably something that the government and other governments need to sort out. The Basel Convention needs to be revised, in my opinion, if you want to do more of the waste battery recycling. So that's one. And then, as I mentioned, it's very fragmented downstream. What I mean downstream is you collect the e-waste. What happens next? Well, somebody transports the collected waste to for batteries, waste battery will be a smelter, because you have to melt everything and then you extract cobalt and other materials out of that. So to get to that process, there are many other pre-process that you have to go through. And each company may be involved in those processes. So it's another industry we're talking about. And at the moment, it's fragmented. It's in some countries, it's not formalized. And the valorized materials, hence, is very expensive to do that, to do the downstream process. So it's for a company to be having ownership of the whole downstream process is expensive. So the ownership is very much fragmented. Yeah, so that's a challenge. And to make things much more circular, you have to have that downstream ecosystem developed much more with a good policy enabling environment. And recycled materials needs to be much more valuable than virgin, because it costs less energy, and you're using less materials, etc., etc. So all these things, very different aspects of the circularity pieces, has to come together for the company to really invest and really sort of try and make sure that they are part of this whole downstream ecosystem. Otherwise, it's going to be a pure cost. And again, now I'm trying to understand the private sector mentality. Obviously, you want to cut costs and have more revenue being streaming in.
No, Inee, what you're saying, of course, we are advancing. It's like we are moving forward or not. Yeah. Then the thing is, how do we deal with the eco-anxiety that, for example, I work with many youth every day. Many youth that are involved. It's different the youth that is not involved and in the climate ecological crisis, and the ones that they are, and they know a lot of stuff, they work on territory, they see how we are in a way crumbling, or I don't know how to say the word in English, but we are not in a good moment, and this probably will be worst in terms of how much water do we have, in terms of droughts, in terms of floods, in terms of species going extinct, ecosystemical services that we are not going to have, in terms of many things. What is your view of the future, your vision? What do you think we can expect? Do you have hope that we are going to tackle this immense crisis that we are dealing? Probably not. What do you think about this?
I think we can overcome the crisis. Now, it's not going to be easy because I think we have waited a bit too long. Especially this year has been quite a startling year, right? With I mean, it started from several years ago, but I think especially this year with the heat wave, and we experienced that in Korea as well. The flooding, the drought. It's just the climate has gone crazy. And as you said, this might actually be more serious in the coming years. So I think we are at that tipping point. And I think people really now have begun to understand, climate change is not something that is in the news. It's not something that is in the textbooks. It's actually reality, and it's affecting our everyday life. So I think we are in that juncture. People are realizing, and even legislation, I mean, from the EU, there's a lot of legislation and policy coming, which is directly affecting many companies. If I mention one, the ESG disclosure, so we write sustainability reports, right? But that was on a voluntary basis. Now it's going to be a legal requirement. And that legislation has come and sort of affected a lot of companies to really, sort of look at their internal systems and prepare for that. So there are many things that are happening here and there. So I do see that we have come to the realization that we have to do something quickly. There will be a COP28 later this year, and I think there's going to be a global stock taking where, the Paris Agreement happened in 2015, right? And there was a 2030 sort of milestone before we reach, 2050 is a net zero sort of target as well, but the 2030 milestone was sort of set. 2023 is like the midpoint. So there's going to be a global stock taking of how well we've been doing, what we need to do further. And I think probably the result will be, we need to really accelerate action.
Was it easy to decode this suit? Our challenge is to build bridges with all the social actors whose decisions have a huge impact and try to create a more sustainable present and future. The only way to save our planet is by working together. Did you solve the puzzle?